So after posting my first video, I kept remembering things that I'd missed out and should have included and gone into more detail, and funnily enough, that actually sums up a large part of my ADHD and how I did at every exam at school. My name is Jo and welcome to ADHDefined. In my previous video, I spoke about other things that people with ADHD may struggle with as well. Throughout my extensive hyperfocus research of ADHD, it's actually really interesting to find that a lot of people don't realise that these are in fact ADHD related. These symptoms that I'm going to talk about can also overlap with other neurodiversities. So let's take a look. Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, or RSD, is an extreme emotional response triggered by the idea that you have been rejected, criticised or judged by the people in your life. And it happens to be something that I struggle with massively. For me, it can happen when I've been spending time with friends all day and I come home and I'm convinced that everybody hates me. It wouldn't matter if I was there or not, and I feel like I just blended in with the furniture. It's the feeling of thinking that we don't fit in at work or at school, and when we didn't put our hand up in class because we were embarrassed if the answer was going to be wrong. Or we just want to be noticed for our hard work, but we still go under the radar. We are also sensitive to perceived rejection. So we anticipate it and we don't push ourselves to what we want to do because we have the intense fear of being embarrassed and scrutinised. So we stop trying. If there is just the slightest possibility of trying something new and failing or falling short, that it becomes too risky to put the effort in and try again. And we end up backing ourselves into a corner where we know it's safe. The perceived rejection I was feeling before I put up my first video almost made me not upload it at all. The thought of being our true selves in front of others and it not being well received is really challenging, and it's really hard not to care what others will think of us. So we mask and we people please. We present a false perception of ourselves and forget who we are and what we want because the fear of rejection can sometimes be bigger than the urge to just truly be ourselves and be happy. And this can leave us vulnerable to people who would happily take advantage of that too. So people who have ADHD feel emotions much more strongly than people who don't. It's actually considered one of the most difficult symptoms to manage, and the psychiatrist I saw for my ADHD assessment was happy to diagnose me, mainly down to my emotional dysregulation. I said in my first video that we can be hot-headed, easily frustrated, and the list of things can ruin our day. And that's what it is. I'll be the first to admit that I can go from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds over nothing in particular. I can have a very short fuse. Yeah, it feels like a fire has been ignited and I just have to let it out at the first person I see, which can lead to problems in friendships and relationships. People with ADHD have a low frustration tolerance. We can get very emotional very quickly, and we can find it extremely difficult to separate uncomfortable emotions, and it can become unbearable. Do you know someone with ADHD, and have they suddenly responded to something that felt out of sync or an overreaction? Our emotions can often blindside us as they can change in a millisecond. We sometimes don't have time to reflect on them and then act on impulse without thinking about the consequences. People with ADHD can be more sensitive than others and easily overwhelmed by everything that's going on around them and their forever racing thoughts. Okay, this is a big one. One that I see is a very common and very misunderstood struggle for those with ADHD. It can be difficult to explain executive dysfunction, but a good metaphor that I saw for it on Reddit was that to imagine that your brain is a series of rooms, and you have to get from one room to the other to complete a task. Now, people without ADHD or neurotypicals can open and close doors with ease, but for people with ADHD, the wall with the door is a mile long. The wall is made out of completely clear glass, and the door has no handle. We will spend hours looking for the door, and this will give us anxiety or cause us to give up. We just can't do what needs to be done in order to complete a task. Any task, for that matter. That's a pretty accurate analogy, and I'll post a link to the full Reddit post down below. It also takes into account things like working memory, like when you walk into a room and forget why you went in there, or you go to the shops for one thing, come out with bags full, and turns out you forgot the one thing that you went in there for. You might forget small details or entire life events. It actually seems to be quite common for adults with ADHD to not remember large chunks of their childhood. Things like organisation and planning play a massive part in this as well. We might find it hard to keep things tidy and presentable. We often don't know where to begin when it comes to starting and finishing a project or a task. We'll be more likely not to pursue something if it requires a lot of mental effort. Attention can be hard to sustain for the task we're doing. We may start something and then end up doing something completely different without even realising. We could be taking something out the fridge for our tea, but then notice something is out of date, so then we go to the bin to throw it away, but the bin's full. We empty the bin to take it outside, but the wheelie bin is full as well. We go back inside to check when bin day is because, well, we've forgotten, and then we end up in a Wikipedia rabbit hole learning about the history and the origin of the modern day bin collection service. And we're still hungry. Time blindness can be a massive struggle for people with ADHD as well. They might underestimate how long it takes to get somewhere and forever be setting off and turning up late. For me, it's the opposite. I'm up to 30 minutes early for pretty much everything. Doctor's appointments, trains, work, meeting up with friends. The anxiety of being late actually kind of makes up for not being late. Yeah, I have absolutely no concept of time at all. Executive dysfunction is the clothes that have been left in your washing machine for days. The dishes that have piled high in the sink, making you feel so guilty every time you walk past them. The unanswered text messages and emails that you just keep meaning to get back to. The unpaid bills, the piles and piles of stuff around you that just don't seem to have their own place to go. It's struggling to find motivation. Executive dysfunction is needing external structure, but hating being told what to do. Figure that one out. And it can make us appear lazy on the outside, but really, it's an internal, daily struggle. I talked in my last video about how scared I was that the mask I made for myself would slip and everybody would see me for a fraud. And that's what imposter syndrome is. It's feeling like you just don't fit in, don't belong, and that you're not deserving of anything good or positive that you've achieved. I've had times when I haven't felt worthy of a good grade at school, or when I was awarded a distinction when I got my diploma. My career has been heavily focused in working in film and TV, and often I would never feel good enough to be working there. I felt that it was a mistake, or a fluke, or good luck that I was there at all, and it wasn't down to my hard work and attributions. We might overwork ourselves to make up for how inadequate we feel. Set stupidly high goals and feel like a failure when we don't meet them. We're perfectionists and we're extra hard on ourselves. We want to work alone and won't ask for help out of fear of looking weak or incompetent. When I first started looking into ADHD and when things gradually fell into place and started making sense, those thoughts came back. The thoughts of, I can't have ADHD, I'm just lazy, I'm just stupid, I'm unmotivated, and I'm just making excuses. The official diagnosis and validation helped ease those thoughts, but they come back every now and again. I often feel like the doctor I saw made a mistake, and I was putting it all on for my appointment and I managed to fool them. And that's how I got diagnosed. I just didn't feel like my struggles deserved validation. Yeah, I need to give myself a break. People with ADHD might struggle processing things that are being said to them. The way I describe it is someone will say something to you, you'll hear it, but your brain will be a few seconds behind and will need to catch up. Someone might ask me something, I'll reply, what? And then answer them whilst they're asking me for a second time, interrupting them. And I can see how that can get annoying. And this can make it really hard when someone is giving you instructions or directions because it's hard to retain the information that's being given to you. And you really don't want to keep asking people to repeat themselves. It can be difficult understanding people talking in noisy places, or people with strong accents, fast talkers, and words that sound the same. Sensory issues are also a struggle with ADHD and other neurodiversities. Things like food texture, the feel of certain types of clothing, and changes to routine. Sensory overload happens when something is overstimulating one or more of the senses. There is just too much information coming at your brain for it to process. For example, the labels in your clothing making your skin crawl, so you cut them all out. Or there are roadworks going on outside, so you tie your hair up because it's making your teeth hurt. That kind of thing. Even maintaining eye contact can be a struggle. I can only do it for a few seconds before my eyes physically look away on their own. Trying to maintain eye contact can sometimes feel physically painful, believe it or not. I've seen people I've been talking to actually do this because I'm just not looking at them directly. People with ADHD can be sensitive to touch that is too light or too heavy, certain textures, being too hot, being too cold, strong smells that might not bother other people, flashing lights, certain tastes and flavours. And the one that I'm most sensitive to sounds like people eating, simultaneous conversations, and people talking over each other. Yeah, I really struggle with Zoom calls that have multiple people on them for this exact reason. And all of these things can lead to something called stimming. Stimming is the abbreviation of self-stimulatory behaviour. It's often experienced by people with ADHD and autism, but people without can experience these too. It's designed to create a sensation in our body, but it's unique to everyone and can change from day to day. It often happens when someone is experiencing sensory overload or they're wanting to release excess energy or hyperactivity. And on the outside, it can look like foot tapping, fidgeting, humming, skin picking, nail biting, and twirling our hair. These can all be a form of control that can help an overloaded sensory system by acting like the source of the feeling. I recently found out that listening to the same song over and over again for days and weeks on end is actually a form of stimming. Who knew? As I've looked back at my life and come to terms with my diagnosis, it makes me feel a little bit better knowing that I wasn't just stupid or lazy or unmotivated. I can give myself a break and just say, hey, it's okay. It's a hell of a lot to handle and deal with, but hopefully I'll learn to manage it better. So, tell me, do you have ADHD and what symptom do you struggle with the most? What are your tips to managing them? Leave a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.